And I'd like to invite Ron to share a reflection with us this morning.
Good morning. It's an honor to be worship associate, particularly on the day that we are taking a big step toward increased activity in our building, the building that's our religious home. And how fitting it is that our touchstone theme for the month is renewal. Normally, we head into January full of hope for a brighter future and resolutions and plans to improve our lives. I have to say that based on emails I've gotten this month and some conversations, there is less hope than usual and considerably more dread. Some of this, I believe, stems from a national trauma that occurred last January. Events unlike anything this country had ever seen took place in the first week of 2021. A nonviolent coup attempt was launched by 12 members of the US Senate, followed by a violent coup effort that came within a few feet of imposing its will on our country. America came very close to transitioning from a struggling democracy to one-man rule, locked in for life. We now live with the clear understanding that it is questionable how long even broken democracy will survive in our country. And then, on top of this, we have witnessed death and social disruption caused by the pandemic that has infected the world for more than 2 years. You can add to that the very public white supremacy-based messaging we are hearing. And this is all on top of watching inaction on fossil fuel emissions threatening to produce, for many decades or perhaps centuries, a climate hostile to human life in large parts of the world. Under these circumstances, why wouldn't we linger in a mood of dread and a period of hand-wringing? Trauma occurs when an event triggers a fight or flight or freeze brain reaction that won't go away. Personally, I believe that during the last presidency, a part of my brain went numb or was spinning in circles. There are too many parallels between what I am seeing now and what my parents endured in Nazi Germany in the 1930s. While I found myself enjoying events in my personal and family life, an ominous headline or a disturbing bit of news could quickly trigger my obsessing. Earlier this week, Reverend Leslie reminded me of the seminal book, Trauma and Recovery, written by Harvard psychiatrist Judith Lewis Herman. Herman lays out 5 aspects of healing from trauma, starting with a healing relationship. A life partner, a good friend, or a relationship with a professional can all serve that purpose. I am privileged to have had all 3 in recent years. The second step that Herman talks about is building up a sense of safety. The best we can do these days to gain some measure of safety regarding worldwide threats is to try to narrow our focus. So, for example, if I make my best choices today, I can limit the chance of being triggered today. I want to zero in on the aspect of healing from trauma that Judith Herman labels reconnection, and a particular type of reconnection that she describes. Some hit by trauma, she writes, will, quote, feel called upon to engage in a wider world. These survivors recognize a political or religious dimension in their misfortune and discover that they can transform the meaning of personal tragedy by making it the basis for social action, unquote. Count me in. I believe that the November 8 elections will either help put the brakes on the decaying of our democracy or help accelerate it. I want to spend time between now and November 8 doing everything I can think of to be part of a movement that says no to rising hate and brutal autocracy. I spend a good chunk of the first 2 weeks of this month drafting a grant proposal to the La Crosse Community Foundation. If funding is awarded, 2 part-time paid staff will be added to our payroll between March and November. And this building will become the hub of voter registration activity in La Crosse County. We should know by mid-February whether or not funding is awarded. If you're wondering when nationwide UU the Vote activity is starting up, the answer is 3 p.m. Central Time today. UU the Vote, an initiative coming at us from our national headquarters, is sponsoring a phone bank into Texas to get people to the polls there on March 1st. The link for this connection is being posted as we speak in the chat. We have a chance between now and November 8th to halt the parade of hate and disinformation that we are watching. We all need to act. I'm not throwing away my shot.
Thank you so much, Ron. Today is a big day for this congregation, full of change, as we have been noting. It's the first Sunday with this option of being back in the sanctuary in almost 2 years, although it still doesn't look or feel quite like it did in the before times. And I'm so glad that many of you are able to gather, masked and distanced and staying safe, and I look forward to being with you in the sanctuary in 3 weeks. And still, as we approach the 2nd anniversary of the pandemic lockdown, we continue to straddle that gap between where we are and where we want to be, or even where we thought we would be by now. Keeping the service entirely virtual, of course, isn't our final goal. Abstaining from coffee and other refreshments isn't the practice that we want to keep in place forever. Last spring, many of you participated in a conversation called Bridges to the Future. In it, we took the time to name the things that have changed as a result of the pandemic, things that started and things that stopped. Some of those changes were sudden and some gradual, some were intentional and some incidental. And we believed at the time, last spring, that the pandemic would be over soon. And so we began to name which changes we wanted to keep and which ones we wanted to let go of. The lists were very long, and if you would like to see them, I'm happy to provide access. But the thing I want to lift up about those conversations today is that many of the changes you noticed were ones that you want to keep, including many of the changes to the way we do Sunday services. Of course, we want the live music back. There's no question about that. But there was a strong favor towards keeping virtual speakers as part of the regular rotation. Certainly not all the speakers, but making room for this hybrid form of presentation allows for greater access to speakers from around the world, as you discovered quite literally in December, when one of your panelists zoomed in from Abu Dhabi. So we're already noticing that not all change is bad, even if it can be a bit unnerving sometimes. We're still evolving into our new normal, whatever that may be. We haven't arrived yet, but we're pulling the pieces into place. And I do hope that you'll keep helping this community with that challenging and sacred work. We are in the in-between, as we mentioned in our opening words. And this is the perfect time of year for that. I'm reminded of the story of Bridget. Some say she was a goddess, others say she was a saint, and some believe that she was a person just like you or me. The mists of time and legend mean that there are many different stories about her and who she was and who she is. She lives in between. They say she was born in the doorway of a barn at dawn on February 1st. So she was born in between indoors and outdoors, winter and spring, night and day. She was born on the threshold. They say that when she was born, a light like a flame appeared out of her head and stretched all the way to the sky. They say that she loves milk and butter. When she was a baby and couldn't eat, a white cow with red ears appeared to feed her with milk. And when she was a girl, she gave away all of her mother's supply of butter to the poor. And then when she prayed, even more butter appeared, enough to replace all she'd given away. They say she gave away precious things to poor people so they could buy food to feed their families. They say she wanted to start a community dedicated to praying and good works. And so one day she came to the king and she said, "Give me this land to build the community." It was a good place on a hill near a lake for water, near a forest with wood for fires to keep warm. It was a good place to grow food, a place with blueberries to eat and to make into jam. But the king said, "No, this is my land." So she and her sisters started praying for the king to change his mind. She asked again, and she said, "King, will you give me as much land as my cloak will cover up?" Now, you can only do so much with the amount of land a person's cloak can cover up. You can't do very much. So the king laughed at Bridget and said, "Certainly, I will grant you this." And Bridget's 4 sisters took her cloak, one at each corner, and stretched it out. One of them walked east, one of them walked south, one of them walked west, and one of them walked north. And the cloak grew and grew, and it spread, and it covered the whole land, everywhere they could see, in every direction, the whole place that Bridget wanted to build her community of healing. And the king realized that she was holy and blessed her and gave her not just the land, but other gifts. And so they say that we gather under Bridget's cloak or her mantle for healing and wonder. They say Bridget's place had a holy flame that had burned from the beginning of time, and that Bridget would bless candles and hearths and forges, that if she didn't have anywhere to hang her cloak, she would hang it on a sunbeam. They say Bridget's place had a holy well, and washing in the water or drinking it would heal you. They say she brought life. If she leaned on something wooden, the dead wood would begin to sprout. They say she could turn water into beer, and that cows who ran dry would give lots of milk if she touched them, so that no one was ever hungry. They say that this is Bridget's time of year at February 1st, now halfway in between the winter solstice and the spring equinox. That now is the time to bless the candles and to celebrate with milk and butter and blueberry jam, to tend the flame, to drink healing waters, to give food to people who need it. To remember that even though the trees look dry and dead, they will sprout again. To know that even though snow covers the ground like a cloak, the seeds are stirring and are alive, waiting for the spring. We find ourselves here in La Crosse in a season of renewal, of rebirth and reimagining. There's a song in our hymnal titled "Return Again." Its lyrics call us to return again, return to the home of your soul, return to who you are, return to what you are, return to where you are born and reborn again. Here we are in our sanctuary, returning for some of us to the home of your soul. And yet it is a threshold moment as well, a time of being in between. Not all of us can gather in person, and not all of us can stand one more Zoom meeting, even for the sake of connection and renewal. It's a time when we need to be gentle with one another, still and always, understanding it will take all of us to bridge this gap between where we are and where we want to be. What would it look like if we each took a corner of Bridget's cloak and walked in the direction of where we want to be? That's what the board is doing by forming a search team. As your leaders, they recognize this gap between the security of the known and the risk and promise of the unknown. It's difficult to be in search when you already have a minister, that's true, but this congregation has always longed for a minister who could move to La Crosse and be with you in the community, who would be putting down roots and reaching beyond the walls of the fellowship, forming ties with other community organizations. That's always been your dream. And we've known from our first conversation that this wouldn't be me. So it is an investment of hope and courage and trust to form a search team to see what ministers are out there who might be looking for a home just like La Crosse. The board knows it's difficult to draw a minister to relocate for a half-time position, even with a congregation as wonderful as this one, but it isn't impossible. And if the ministers don't know you're looking, they won't know to find you. And so I hope that you will support the board and the search team as together we stretch ourselves to straddle this gap. I'm still with you for this church year, and there's so much that we can still do together. And as the search process unfolds, we'll gain a clearer picture of what options become viable for next year. Nothing is determined yet, and it's up to us to wait on that threshold of possibility. We can hold fast to the corner of the cloak closest to us and trust that others are spread out around the other edges. And we can stay connected through that rich fabric, working together to spread it across the gap. Together, we will return again, return to the home of your soul.